The harsh winter winds of 1876 howled across the Montana Territory like vengeful spirits. But Olivia Thorne barely noticed as she swept the worn wooden floor of the Dusty Rose Saloon. At 24, her hands were already rough from years of hard work, her green eyes carrying a wariness that belied her youth. The saloon was empty this early morning, just the way she preferred it, allowing her thoughts to wander freely without the burden of maintaining the carefully constructed persona she presented to the world. Snow piled against the frosted windows, casting dim, blue-tinged light across the room. 6 months she'd been in Silver Creek, and 6 months she'd managed to keep her past buried. The townspeople knew her only as Olivia, the quiet woman who worked for old Mrs. Wilcox, serving drinks and occasionally singing when business was slow. They didn't know about Denver. They didn't know about Sacramento. And they certainly didn't know about what happened in San Francisco. The jingle of spurs against the boardwalk outside pulled her from her reverie. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of frigid air and a dusting of snow that sparkled like diamond dust in the early morning light. "We're not open yet," Olivia called, not looking up from her sweeping. "Just looking for some coffee, madam. Been riding all night." His voice was deep, with a hint of Texas in it. Olivia glanced up, broom pausing mid-sweep. The man standing in the doorway was tall, his broad shoulders dusted with snow. A dark cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, darkened with several days' worth of stubble. His long coat was expensive but worn, speaking of a man who valued quality but lived hard in the saddle. "Mrs. Wilcox doesn't come down until 8, Olivia said, resuming her sweeping. "There's no fire in the stove yet." The stranger closed the door behind him, stomping snow from his boots. "I can wait, if you don't mind." Something in his tone made her look up again. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, startlingly blue against his wind-burned face. A small scar cut through his right eyebrow, giving him a perpetually questioning look. "Suit yourself," she said, gesturing to a table near the unlit stove. "But it'll be cold sitting there." The man smiled, and Olivia felt something flutter in her chest that she immediately suppressed. She'd learned long ago that handsome men with charming smiles were the most dangerous kind. "I've been colder," he said, settling into a chair and placing his hat on the table. He extended a gloved hand. "Xavier Blackwood." Olivia hesitated before briefly touching his hand. "Olivia Thorne." "Pretty name," he said, those blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Fits you." "I'll tell Mrs. Wilcox you're waiting," she said curtly, turning away to hide the blush she could feel warming her cheeks. "Much obliged," Xavier called after her as she retreated to the back room. Olivia leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath to steady herself. There was something about Xavier Blackwood that unsettled her. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, as if he could see past the careful mask she wore. Or perhaps it was simply that he was the most striking man to walk into the Dusty Rose since she'd arrived in Silver Creek. Either way, she decided as she lit the stove to heat water for coffee. Xavier Blackwood was exactly the sort of complication she didn't need in her life. When Olivia returned to the main room with a pot of coffee and a single cup, Xavier was standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Morning light caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of copper she hadn't noticed before. "Looks like the storm's passing," he said without turning. "Should be clear by midday. You planning to move on then?" Olivia asked, pouring the coffee. Xavier turned, offering her a half-smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Not just yet. I have some business in Silver Creek." What kind of business brings a man like you to a place like this in the dead of winter? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. A man like me. Xavier raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes as he took the offered cup. And what kind of man might that be, Miss Thorne? Olivia felt her cheeks warm again. A Texan, for one. You're a long way from home. Ah, he sipped the coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. You've got a good ear, but Texas hasn't been home for some time now. So where is home? Olivia asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. Curiosity was dangerous. It invited conversation, connection. Nowhere in particular, Xavier answered, setting the cup down. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a coin on the table. I go where the work takes me. And what work is that? His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might not answer. Then he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm a horse trader. Buying, selling, breeding. Headed up to the McIntyre Ranch to look at some stock. Olivia nodded, knowing the McIntyre spread was one of the largest in the territory. That's about 20 miles north. You'll want to wait for the weather to clear. My thoughts exactly. Xavier finished his coffee in a single swallow. Know any place a man might get a room for a few days, Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house 2 streets over, Olivia said. Clean rooms, fair prices. Much obliged for the recommendation. Xavier placed his hat back on his head. And for the coffee, best I've had in 100 miles. Despite herself, Olivia smiled. Low standards, Mr. Blackwood. Very low standards. His laugh was unexpected and warm, filling the empty saloon. Perhaps good company improves the flavor. With a tip of his hat, Xavier Blackwood headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Will you be here later, Miss Thorne? When the saloon is open for business. Olivia hesitated, torn between the sensible answer and the truth. I'll be here, she said finally. I work every night except Sundays. Then I reckon I'll see you tonight. With that, he was gone, leaving nothing but melting snow and the lingering scent of leather and pine. Olivia stared at the closed door, a strange feeling of anticipation and dread coiling in her stomach. She had spent 6 months carefully avoiding any attachments in Silver Creek, keeping everyone at a polite distance. Yet something about Xavier Blackwood's blue eyes and easy smile threatened the walls she had built around herself. Fool girl, she muttered, picking up the empty coffee cup. Don't you go getting ideas. By the time evening fell, the snowstorm had passed, leaving Silver Creek blanketed in white that glowed blue beneath the rising moon. The Dusty Rose Saloon was doing brisk business, the cold weather driving men indoors to seek warmth in whiskey and company. Olivia moved efficiently between tables, delivering drinks and deflecting advances with practiced ease. Mrs. Wilcox, a sharp-eyed widow in her 60s, watched from behind the bar, her arthritic hands still nimble enough to pour drinks and count money with uncanny accuracy. That new fellow's been watching you all night, Mrs. Wilcox commented when Olivia returned to the bar for another round of drinks. The tall one by the window. Olivia didn't need to look to know who Mrs. Wilcox meant. Xavier Blackwood had arrived an hour after they opened, taking a seat by the window where he nursed a single whiskey and declined offers to join various poker games. She had felt his eyes on her throughout the evening. He's just passing through, Olivia said, arranging glasses on her tray. Horse trader heading to the McIntyre Ranch, Mrs. Wilcox snorted. Horse trader with a Colt peacemaker and a knife in his boot. Seems overly prepared for selling ponies. Olivia glanced at Xavier then, taking in the well-worn gun belt at his hip that she hadn't noticed earlier. Many men carried weapons in the territories, but there was something about the way the peacemaker sat against his thigh that suggested familiarity beyond the ordinary. It's dangerous country, Olivia said, though doubt had crept into her mind. MMM. Mrs. Wilcox's eyes narrowed. Well, just you be careful, girl. Men with secrets are trouble, and that one's carrying something heavy. The irony of the warning wasn't lost on Olivia, who carried enough secrets of her own to sink a riverboat. She delivered the drinks to a table of minors, then found herself approaching Xavier's table almost against her will. "Can I get you another?" she asked, nodding to his nearly empty glass. Xavier looked up, his eyes catching the lamplight. "Only if you'll sit a spell and share it with me." "I'm working. Even hard-working women deserve a break." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Just 5 minutes." Olivia glanced over her shoulder at Mrs. Wilcox, who was watching them with undisguised interest. The older woman gave a slight nod, and Olivia sighed. 5 minutes, she conceded, sitting down stiffly. Xavier signaled to Mrs. Wilcox for 2 drinks, then turned his attention back to Olivia. "You don't seem like a saloon girl," he said without preamble. Olivia stiffened. "And what does a saloon girl seem like, Mr. Blackwood?" He held up a hand in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, just an observation. You move through this room like you're separate from it, not part of it, like you're just passing through." His perception unsettled her. "Maybe I am," she said carefully. "Passing through. Where you headed?" Xavier asked as Mrs. Wilcox delivered their drinks. Olivia took a small sip of whiskey, welcoming the burn. "Nowhere in particular," she said, echoing his words from that morning. "I go where the work takes me." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Taché, Miss Thorne." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the saloon washing around them like a river around stones. "How long have you been in Silver Creek?" Xavier finally asked. 6 months, give or take." "And before that?" Olivia's guard rose immediately. "Before that isn't important." Xavier studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We all have pasts we'd rather not discuss. Including you," Olivia couldn't help asking, "especially me." He raised his glass in a small toast. "To the present moment, then, the only one that matters." Olivia hesitated, then clinked her glass against his. The present moment. As she drank, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that Xavier Blackwood was more than he appeared. The question was whether that made him more dangerous or more like her. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Xavier would arrive at the saloon early in the morning, ostensibly for coffee, though he spent more time talking to Olivia than drinking. In the evenings, he would claim the same table by the window, nursing a whiskey and watching the room with the careful attention of a man accustomed to anticipating trouble. Despite her initial reservations, Olivia found herself drawn to him. Xavier was well-read and well-traveled, with stories of cattle drives in Texas, gold mining in California, and sailing ships in New Orleans. He spoke with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, yet there was a wariness in his eyes that mirrored her own. On the 4th day, Olivia arrived at the saloon to find Mrs. Wilcox in an unusually cheerful mood. "Town's having a social tomorrow night," the older woman announced, handing Olivia a broom. "To celebrate the new schoolhouse being finished, there'll be dancing." Olivia began sweeping, uninterested. "That's nice. You should go," Mrs. Wilcox pressed. "Get out, meet people. You're young, pretty. Shouldn't be spending every night serving drinks to minors and cowhands." "I like my job just fine," Olivia said firmly. Mrs. Wilcox sighed. "Girl, whatever you're running from, it won't catch you if you dance one night." Before Olivia could respond, the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Xavier Blackwood. "Morning, ladies," he called cheerfully, removing his hat. "Mrs. Wilcox, you're looking lovely as ever." The older woman laughed, charmed despite herself. "And you're full of cow manure, Mr. Blackwood, but I appreciate the sentiment. Coffee, please." Xavier settled at his usual table, his eyes finding Olivia's. "Morning, Miss Thorne." Olivia nodded in greeting, continuing her sweeping. "I thought you'd be headed to the McIntyre Ranch by now." "Planning to ride out tomorrow," Xavier said. "Wanted to see if the new stock is worth the investment. You've been investigating the local stock quite thoroughly," Mrs. Wilcox commented dryly as she placed a cup of coffee before him. Xavier's eyes remained on Olivia. Some things are worth taking time to properly appreciate. Olivia felt her cheeks warm and turned away, focusing intently on sweeping a corner that was already clean. "Speaking of appreciation," Mrs. Wilcox continued, "there's a social tomorrow night. Dancing, food, decent company for a change. You ought to attend, Mr. Blackwood, before you head back to wherever it is you really came from." Xavier raised an eyebrow at the older woman's implication. "That sounds pleasant. Will you be attending, Miss Thorne?" "No," Olivia said firmly. "Yes, she will," Mrs. Wilcox contradicted. "I'm giving her the night off. Girl needs some fresh air and music." Xavier's smile widened. "In that case, I might delay my departure another day. Been too long since I had a proper dance." Olivia shot Mrs. Wilcox a betrayed look, but the older woman merely shrugged, unrepentant. "You two young people enjoy yourselves. I'm heading to the mercantile for supplies. Olivia, mind the place till I return." After Mrs. Wilcox had bundled herself into her coat and departed, an awkward silence fell between Olivia and Xavier. "You don't have to go to the social on my account," Olivia finally said, leaning the broom against the wall. "I know you have business at the McIntyre Ranch." Xavier shrugged. "A day's delay won't matter much, unless—" He studied her face. "Unless you're trying to politely tell me you don't want my company." Olivia hesitated. The truth was, she did want his company, and that frightened her. "It's not that," she said carefully. "I just don't dance much." "I find that hard to believe," Xavier said, rising from his chair and approaching her. "A woman who moves as gracefully as you must be a natural dancer." He was standing too close now, close enough that she could smell the pine and leather scent of him, see the tiny flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, Xavier," he corrected gently. "After 4 days of morning coffee and evening whiskey, I think we can use Christian names, don't you?" Olivia swallowed hard. "Xavier, then. I don't think one dance," he pressed, his voice low. "Just one dance, Olivia." "Then if you want me to leave you alone, I will." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. "One dance," she agreed reluctantly. His smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "One dance," he repeated. "I'll look forward to it." When he left a few minutes later, Olivia sat heavily in a chair, her heart racing. One dance. What harm could come from one dance? Yet as she thought of Xavier's blue eyes and the way her name sounded in his mouth, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a precipice, about to step into thin air. The social was held in the newly completed schoolhouse, a sturdy wooden building at the edge of town. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm golden light over the rough-hewn floors. Tables lined the walls, laden with food brought by the townswomen: pies, cakes, cold meats, and bread. Olivia arrived late, hoping to slip in unnoticed. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was pinned up, with a few curls framing her face. It had been so long since she'd dressed for a social occasion that she felt awkward and exposed. The schoolhouse was crowded, nearly everyone in Silver Creek having turned out for the celebration. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a banjo player, and a man with a harmonica played lively tunes in the corner, while couples danced in the center of the room. Olivia hovered near the door, scanning the crowd. She didn't see Xavier, and a mixture of relief and disappointment washed over her. Perhaps he had decided to leave for the McIntyre Ranch after all. You came. The voice behind her made her jump. She turned to find Xavier standing there, looking nothing like the trail-worn cowboy she'd grown accustomed to seeing. He was clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed. He wore a crisp white shirt under a black vest with a string tie at his throat. His usual worn trousers had been replaced by darker ones, though he still wore his boots, polished to a shine. "I said I would," Olivia replied, trying to sound casual despite the way her pulse had quickened at the sight of him. Xavier's eyes traveled over her, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Olivia glanced away, uncomfortable with the compliment. "You clean up well yourself," Xavier laughed. "Amazing what soap and a razor can accomplish." He held out his hand. "I believe you promised me a dance." The musicians had just begun a waltz, the fiddle carrying a sweet, melancholy melody. Olivia hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Xavier led her to the dance floor, his other hand settling at the small of her back. The touch was light, respectful, but Olivia was acutely aware of the warmth of his palm through the fabric of her dress. "I haven't danced in a long time," she admitted as they began to move with the music. "You're doing fine," Xavier assured her, guiding her through a turn. "Just follow my lead." Olivia relaxed slightly, allowing Xavier to steer them through the other dancing couples. He was an excellent dancer, moving with the same fluid grace she had noticed when he walked. "Where did a horse trader learn to waltz?" she asked, genuinely curious. Xavier's lips quirked in a half-smile. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said a man who can dance would never lack for female company." "She was right," Olivia said before she could stop herself. Xavier's smile widened. "Is that so?" Olivia flushed. "I only meant I know what you meant," he said, his voice gentle. "And I'm flattered." They danced in silence for a moment, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon. "Tell me something true about yourself, Olivia," Xavier said suddenly. "Something no one else in Silver Creek knows." Olivia tensed. "Why would I do that?" "Because I've spent 4 days wondering who you really are," he answered honestly. "And I think you've been wondering the same about me." She couldn't deny it. "You go first," she countered. Xavier considered for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, I'm not really a horse trader." Despite her suspicions, the confirmation surprised her. "Then what are you?" "I was a Texas Ranger," he said, his voice low. "For 7 years, left 2 years ago." "Why did you leave?" Xavier's expression darkened. "That's a second truth. Your turn first." Olivia bit her lip, considering what she could safely reveal. "I can play the piano," she said finally. "Not just saloon tunes, classical music. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin." Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Where did you learn that?" "My father taught me. He was a music professor before." She trailed off, unwilling to continue down that path of memory. Xavier seemed to sense her reluctance and didn't press. "I'd like to hear you play someday." "Your turn," Olivia said, steering the conversation away from herself. "Why did you leave the Rangers?" The waltz ended, but Xavier kept hold of her hand, leading her toward the refreshment table. "Shot a man I shouldn't have," he said quietly, handing her a cup of punch. "Or didn't shoot a man I should have, depending on who you ask." Olivia studied his face, seeing the shadows of old pain in his eyes. "That's not the whole story." "No," he agreed, "but it's enough for now." He sipped his punch, watching her over the rim of his cup. "Your turn again. What brought you to Silver Creek?" Olivia stiffened. "I needed work. Mrs. Wilcox was hiring." "That's not a truth, Olivia. That's an evasion." She set her cup down with more force than necessary. "Perhaps I don't owe you my life story, Xavier." "No," he agreed, his voice gentle. "You don't, but I'm asking anyway." Before Olivia could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. 3 men had entered, trail dusty and radiating the particular swagger of cowboys with whiskey in their bellies and mischief on their minds. Xavier's posture changed instantly, the relaxed dancer replaced by a man prepared for trouble. His hand drifted subtly toward his hip, though he wasn't wearing his gun belt tonight. "Friends of yours?" Olivia asked, noting his reaction. "Not even slightly," Xavier murmured, his eyes tracking the newcomers as they made their way to the punch bowl, jostling people aside. The tallest of the three, a rangy man with a drooping mustache, spotted Olivia and Xavier. His eyes lingered on Olivia in a way that made her skin crawl, then shifted to Xavier. Recognition and something like hatred flashed across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," the man drawled loudly. "Xavier Blackwood, long way from Texas, ain't you, Ranger?" A hush fell over the nearby partygoers. Xavier stepped slightly in front of Olivia, his posture casual but his eyes hard. "Evening, Mercer," he said calmly. "Didn't expect to see you this far north." Mercer spat on the floor, drawing gasps from some of the townswomen. "Bet you didn't." "Last I heard, you was told to steer clear of Montana territory." "Seems we both got poor memories," Xavier replied, his tone light but his meaning clear. Olivia watched the exchange with growing alarm. The tension between the two men was palpable, and the other partygoers were beginning to edge away, sensing the potential for violence. "Sheriff's not here tonight," Mercer said, his hand hovering near his gun. "No one to stop me from finishing what we started in Laramie." Xavier's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You want to shoot an unarmed man at a town social, Mercer, in front of women and children? That's low even for you." Mercer's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to register the disapproving murmurs from the crowd. His hand moved away from his gun. "This ain't over, Blackwood," he growled. "Not by a long shot." "Never thought it was," Xavier replied evenly. With a final glare, Mercer jerked his head at his companions and the three men retreated, shoving their way back through the crowd and out the door. As conversation gradually resumed around them, Olivia gripped Xavier's arm. "Who was that?" Xavier's jaw was tight, his eyes still on the door. "Curtis Mercer, cattle rustler, among other things. I brought his brother in 4 years ago. Brother died trying to escape." "And he blames you," Olivia guessed. "With good reason," Xavier said grimly. "I shot him." Olivia stared at Xavier, seeing him in a new light. This wasn't just a former lawman, this was a man with enemies, dangerous enemies. "You should go," she said quietly. "If he's looking for revenge, I'm not leaving you here," Xavier cut her off. "Not when Mercer saw us together. He's exactly the type to hurt someone just to get to me." A cold fear gripped Olivia's heart. She knew men like Mercer, had encountered them before. "Then we both go. Now." Xavier studied her face, then nodded sharply. "I'll take you home." They slipped out a side door, Xavier keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings as they made their way through the moonlit streets of Silver Creek. Snow crunched beneath their boots, their breath fogging in the cold night air. "Where are you staying?" Xavier asked, his hand resting on the small of her back as he guided her around a patch of ice. "I have a room above the saloon," Olivia answered, scanning the shadows nervously. "Mrs. Wilcox lives there too," Xavier nodded. "Good, not isolated." Harder for Mercer to try anything. They reached the saloon without incident. Xavier insisted on checking the alleyway and the back entrance before allowing Olivia to unlock the door. "I'll come in with you," he said. "Make sure everything's secure." Olivia hesitated only briefly before nodding. The saloon was dark and quiet, the chairs stacked on tables for the night. Olivia lit a lamp, casting long shadows across the empty room. "The stairs to the living quarters are through here," she said, leading Xavier toward the back. They climbed the narrow staircase, Xavier pausing at each landing to listen. The upstairs hallway was silent, Mrs. Wilcox presumably still at the social. "This is me," Olivia said, stopping at her door. She turned to face Xavier, suddenly aware of their solitude. "Thank you for walking me home." Xavier made no move to leave. "I should stay," he said, "at least until Mrs. Wilcox returns. Mercer might have followed us." Olivia knew she should refuse. Having a man in her room, especially one who stirred such confusing emotions in her, was dangerous in an entirely different way than Curtis Mercer. Yet the memory of Mercer's hateful eyes decided her. "All right," she said, unlocking her door, "but just until Mrs. Wilcox gets back." Xavier followed her into the small, neat room. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a dresser against another. A small table with a single chair sat beneath the window, which looked out over the main street. A worn rug covered most of the plank floor, and a curtain partially concealed a washstand in the corner. Olivia set the lamp on the table, acutely conscious of Xavier's presence in her private space. He remained near the door, his posture tense. "You can sit," she offered, gesturing to the chair. Xavier shook his head. "I'll stand, better view of the window and door." An awkward silence fell between them. Olivia removed her shawl, hanging it on a peg by the door. She was intensely aware of Xavier watching her, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said finally. "I didn't expect trouble to follow me here." "Does it often?" Olivia asked. "Follow you?" Xavier's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "More often than I'd like. Hazard of the profession, I suppose." "Former profession," he corrected himself. "What are you now, if not a ranger?" Olivia asked, settling on the edge of her bed. "And don't say horse trader." Xavier leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Bounty hunter occasionally, guide, whatever honest work I can find." "Is that what brought you to Silver Creek?" "A bounty," Xavier hesitated, then nodded. "Man named Thomas Welland, bank robber. Word was he was heading this way." "And was he?" "No sign of him yet," Xavier admitted. "But Mercer's presence changes things. They've worked together before." Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "So there could be two dangerous men in town looking for you." "Looking for Welland," Xavier corrected. "Mercer's just an unfortunate coincidence." He studied her face. "You're afraid." "Wouldn't you be?" Olivia countered. "Yes," Xavier said simply, "but you're afraid of more than just Mercer." "You've been afraid since I met you." Olivia stiffened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're running from something," Xavier said quietly. "I know you watch the doors whenever you're in a room. I know you flinch when men get too close. And I know the look in your eyes, Olivia." "I've seen it in the mirror." Olivia stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Stop," she whispered. "Just stop." Xavier remained where he was, giving her space. "Whatever it is, whatever happened, it doesn't matter to me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "You say that now, you don't know what I've done." "Then tell me," Xavier said, his voice gentle. "Tell me, Olivia." Perhaps it was the events of the evening, or the way Xavier looked at her not with judgment but with understanding, or simply the weight of carrying her secrets alone for so long. Whatever the reason, Olivia found herself speaking words she had sworn never to utter again. "I killed a man," she said, her back still to Xavier, her eyes fixed on the moonlit street below. "In San Francisco. A year ago." The silence that followed her confession seemed to stretch into eternity. Olivia waited for the sound of the door opening and closing, for Xavier's footsteps retreating down the hall. Instead, she heard him move closer, stopping just behind her. "Who was he?" Xavier asked, his voice steady. Olivia closed her eyes, memories flooding back. "His name was James Hargrove. He was wealthy, respected, and he was going to marry me." "What happened?" Olivia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I discovered what kind of man he really was. The things he'd done to other women. The things he planned to do to me once we were married and I was his property. She felt Xavier's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "He hurt you," he said, not a question but a statement. He tried. Olivia's voice hardened. "The night I told him I was breaking our engagement, he became violent, said no one left him. Said he'd make sure no man would want me after he was done." She heard Xavier's sharp intake of breath but continued, the words pouring out now that the dam had broken. "There was a letter opener on his desk. When he came at me, I grabbed it. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. But there was so much blood." Her voice broke. "I ran, changed my name, kept moving. Sacramento, Denver, finally here. Self-defense," Xavier said firmly. "Any judge would see that." Olivia turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "It would be his word against mine." And James Hargrove's word carried weight in San Francisco. "His family has connections, money. They've been looking for me. There was a notice in a Denver paper, a reward for information about the murderess who killed their beloved son." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Bastards," he muttered. "Now you understand," Olivia said, wiping angrily at a tear that had escaped. "Why I can't stay in one place too long. Why I can't afford connections, attachments." She expected pity, perhaps, or awkward reassurance. What she didn't expect was for Xavier to reach out and gently brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch so tender it made her breath catch. "I understand better than most," he said quietly. "The weight of a life taken, even when you had no choice. The way it follows you changes you." "Then you understand why I have to keep moving," Olivia insisted. "Why I can't what?" Xavier asked when she didn't continue. Olivia looked up at him, at the compassion in his blue eyes, and felt something inside her crumble. "Can't feel what I'm beginning to feel for you," she whispered. Xavier stepped closer, his hand moving to cup her cheek. "And what is that, Olivia?" "Hope," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Hope that maybe I don't have to be alone, that maybe someone could know the truth about me and not turn away." "I'm not turning away," Xavier said, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "Not now. Not ever." Olivia searched his face, looking for any sign of deceit or judgment, but found only sincerity and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you stay after what I've told you?" Xavier's eyes held hers. "Because I see you, Olivia. Not just what happened in San Francisco, but all of you. Your strength. Your kindness. The way you help Mrs. Wilcox when her hands pain her too much to work. The way you slip extra drinks to the miners who have fallen on hard times. The way you face each day with courage, despite everything." His words washed over her like a healing balm, soothing wounds she hadn't realized were still open and raw. "I've taken lives too," Xavier continued. "In the line of duty, most of them. But not all. The man I told you about, the reason I left the Rangers, he was unarmed when I shot him." Olivia's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because he'd killed a young woman," Xavier said, his voice hardening. "Brutally. But he was the son of a state senator. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. He was going to walk free, go back to his life of privilege while her family got no justice." Understanding dawned on Olivia. "So you took justice into your own hands?" Xavier nodded grimly. "I waited until he left a saloon one night. Followed him into an alley, made it look like a robbery gone wrong. My captain suspected but couldn't prove anything. Still, the message was clear. Turn in my badge or face charges." "You don't regret it," Olivia observed. "Not the outcome," Xavier admitted, "but the necessity of it. That a man's connections could put him above the law. That I had to become what I'd spent years fighting against." Olivia understood then why Xavier hadn't recoiled from her confession. They were mirrors of each other in many ways, both carrying the burden of lives taken, both adrift in a world that had no place for them. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Xavier's hand moved from her cheek to gently grasp her shoulder. "Now, I make sure Mercer and his friends don't cause trouble for you or anyone else in Silver Creek. And then, Olivia prompted when he hesitated. A smile touched Xavier's lips. "And then, if you'll let me, I'd like to see if there's something worth building between us. Something more than two people running from their pasts." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. "What if the Hargroves find me? What if your bounty hunting brings more men like Mercer?" "Then we face it together," Xavier said simply. "I'm tired of running, Olivia, aren't you?" Before she could answer, the sound of the saloon door opening downstairs startled them both. Xavier moved instantly to the window, peering down at the street. "It's Mrs. Wilcox," he reported, relaxing slightly. "With the sheriff." Olivia nodded, relieved yet somehow disappointed that their conversation had been interrupted. "You should go," she said, "before she comes up." Xavier hesitated, then nodded. "We'll talk more tomorrow." He moved to the door, then paused, turning back to her. "Olivia." "Yes." "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me with your truth." The simple sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Olivia's eyes. "Thank you for not walking away when you heard it." Xavier's smile was gentle. "Some things are worth staying for." With that, he slipped out the door, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of her room, her heart fuller than it had been in longer than she could remember. Dawn broke cold and clear over Silver Creek, the rising sun turning the snow-covered streets to gold. Olivia had slept little, her mind replaying her conversation with Xavier, alternating between hope and doubt. By the time she descended to the saloon to begin her morning chores, dark circles shadowed her eyes, but there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Wilcox was already at the bar, counting bottles. She looked up as Olivia entered, her shrewd eyes taking in Olivia's appearance. "You left the social early," the older woman observed. "With that Blackwood fellow." Olivia busied herself with the broom, avoiding Mrs. Wilcox's gaze. "There was some trouble. Mr. Blackwood thought it best we leave." Mrs. Wilcox set down her pencil. "Sheriff Donovan mentioned some rough types rode into town last night. Said one of them seemed to have a grudge against your Mr. Blackwood." "He's not my Mr. Blackwood," Olivia protested automatically. Mrs. Wilcox snorted. "Could have fooled me, the way you two look at each other." Her expression softened. "Be careful, girl. Men with pasts have a way of dragging others into them." The irony of the warning made Olivia smile despite herself. "I'll keep that in mind." The morning passed slowly, with no sign of Xavier. By midday, Olivia found herself watching the door with increasing anxiety. Had he reconsidered in the cold light of day? Had her confession proven too much after all? Or worse, had Mercer found him? Just as she was contemplating asking Sheriff Donovan to check the boarding house, the saloon door swung open. Xavier stood there, his expression grim, his clothes trail dusty. Behind him stood another man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a star pinned to his vest. "Miss Thorne," Xavier said formally, "this is Marshal Frank Porter. He'd like to ask you some questions." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. Her eyes flew to Xavier's, seeking reassurance, explanation, but his expression was unreadable. "Questions about what, Mrs.?" Wilcox demanded, moving to stand beside Olivia. Marshal Porter removed his hat, revealing graying hair and a weathered face creased with lines of authority. "About a matter in San Francisco," he said, his eyes fixed on Olivia. "Concerning the death of James Hargrove." Olivia's knees threatened to buckle. She gripped the edge of a table to steady herself. "I see," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Wilcox looked from Olivia to Xavier, comprehension dawning in her eyes. You brought him here, she accused Xavier, after she trusted you. It's not what you think, Xavier began, but the marshal cut him off. Perhaps we could speak somewhere private, Miss Thorne, Porter suggested. Or should I say Miss Coleman? The use of her real name confirmed Olivia's worst fears. Somehow they had found her. And Xavier had betrayed her. You can use my office, Mrs. Wilcox said coldly. Through there. She pointed to a door behind the bar, then turned to Olivia. You don't have to say anything without a lawyer present. Marshal Porter nodded. That's her right, of course. Though I think she'll want to hear what I have to say. Olivia straightened her shoulders, forcing steel into her spine. She had known this day might come, had prepared for it in her way. What she hadn't prepared for was the betrayal by the man she had begun to trust, to care for. After you, Marshal, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. As she passed Xavier, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. The pain was too raw, too fresh. She had opened herself to him, revealed her deepest secret, and he had used it against her, Mrs. Wilcox's office was small and cluttered, dominated by a desk covered in ledgers and papers. Marshal Porter waited for Olivia to sit before taking the chair across from her. To her surprise, Xavier followed them in, closing the door behind him. You have no right to be here, Olivia said to him, her voice cold with hurt and betrayal. Hear him out, Marshal Porter said unexpectedly. Blackwood's the reason I'm here. Confused, Olivia looked between the two men. I don't understand. Marshal Porter opened a leather satchel and removed a folder. 3 weeks ago, I received information about the Hargrove case, evidence that had been suppressed. What kind of evidence? Olivia asked warily. Letters, the marshal said. Diaries. Testimony from 3 other women who had similar experiences with Hargrove. One nearly died from the injuries he inflicted. Olivia's breath caught. How? That's where I come in, Xavier said quietly. After I left the Rangers, I did some investigation work. One case involved a woman in El Paso whose sister had been engaged to Hargrove before you. She disappeared after breaking it off. Family never heard from her again. Xavier has been tracking Hargrove's history for almost a year, Marshal Porter explained, building a case. When he heard about the reward the Hargroves were offering for the murderess, he connected the dots. Hope, fragile and trembling, began to bloom in Olivia's chest. You weren't turning me in, she said to Xavier. Never, he replied, his eyes intense. I've been trying to clear your name. Marshal Porter nodded. The evidence Blackwood gathered was compelling enough that I took it to a federal judge. Given Hargrove's history of violence against women and the circumstances of his death, the judge has ruled it justifiable homicide. Self-defense. Olivia's hands began to shake. You mean you're free, Miss Coleman, the marshal said simply. No charges will be filed. You can go back to using your real name if you wish. Go home. Tears filled Olivia's eyes, spilling down her cheeks unchecked. After a year of running, of looking over her shoulder, of fearing every knock at the door, to hear those words seemed impossible. The Hargroves, she managed to say through her tears. They have influence, they've been discredited, Xavier said, moving to kneel beside her chair. The evidence against their son was made public. They've retreated to Europe to escape the scandal. Olivia looked at Xavier through her tears, seeing now what she had missed earlier, the hope in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that came not from betrayal but from fear that she would misunderstand his actions. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Last night when I told you everything, why didn't you say you already knew? Xavier took her hands in his. I needed to hear it from you, he said, to know you trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Marshal Porter cleared his throat, rising from his chair. I'll leave you two to talk. I'll need a formal statement later, Miss Coleman, but there's no rush. He tipped his hat to her. You're a brave woman. Not many would have survived what you did." After the marshal had left, closing the door behind him, silence fell between Olivia and Xavier. He still knelt beside her chair, her hands clasped in his. "I thought you'd betrayed me," Olivia said softly. "When you walked in with him, I thought—" "I know," Xavier interrupted. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you, but Porter arrived this morning and things moved quickly." Olivia shook her head, still trying to absorb the enormity of what had happened. "All this time, you were trying to help me, even before you knew who I was." Xavier smiled, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "I knew who you were the moment I walked into this saloon, Olivia Coleman. A survivor, a woman of extraordinary courage, someone worth knowing." "How did you find me?" Olivia asked. "How did you know I was in Silver Creek?" "I didn't," Xavier admitted. "I really was tracking Thomas Welland. Finding you here was Providence." Olivia laughed shakily. "Providence or fate?" "Either way," Xavier said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I'm grateful." Olivia looked into his blue eyes, seeing the man who had not turned away from her darkness, but instead had worked to bring her into the light. "So am I," she whispered. Xavier's smile faded, his expression growing serious. "Last night, before we were interrupted, I asked if you were tired of running." "I am," Olivia said, her voice stronger now. "So tired." "Then stop," Xavier said simply. "Stay here or come with me, or we'll go somewhere new together." "But no more running, Olivia, no more hiding." The offer took her breath away. "Just like that. You change your plans for me in a heartbeat," Xavier replied without hesitation. "I've spent 2 years drifting, looking for something I couldn't name. I think I found it the moment you looked up from sweeping that floor and met my eyes." Olivia's heart swelled with an emotion she had thought she would never feel again. Hope. Not the fragile, fearful hope of temporary safety, but the solid, sustaining hope of a future. A future she might not have to face alone. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Xavier brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Say you'll think about it. That's all I ask for now." Olivia nodded, unable to trust her voice. Xavier rose to his feet, still holding her hands. "Marshal Porter will need to speak with you again," he said. "And there's still the matter of Mercer and his friends. I need to find them before they cause trouble." "Be careful," Olivia said, suddenly afraid for him. "Mercer seemed dangerous." "He is," Xavier acknowledged, "but so am I when necessary." He squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "I'll come back this evening. We can talk more then." As Xavier turned to leave, Olivia called after him, "Xavier." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." His smile warmed her to her core. "Always, Olivia, always." The afternoon passed in a blur for Olivia. Mrs. Wilcox, after hearing the full story, had insisted she take the day off. But Olivia needed the normalcy of work to anchor her amid the swirling emotions of the day. She swept floors, polished glasses, and served the few customers who came in, all while her mind raced with possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider before. A future. A real future, not just surviving day to day. Perhaps even a future with Xavier, whose quiet strength and unwavering support had begun to heal wounds she had thought would never close. As evening approached, the saloon grew busier. The miners from the hills came in for their after-work drinks, and a group of cowboys from a nearby ranch filled a corner table. Mrs. Wilcox handled the bar while Olivia moved among the tables, serving drinks and deflecting the occasional flirtation with practiced ease. The sky outside had darkened to deep blue when the saloon door swung open with enough force to bang against the wall. Conversation stuttered to a halt as Curtis Mercer strode in, flanked by his 2 companions from the night before. All 3 men wore their guns openly, their expressions hard. "Where's Blackwood?" Mercer demanded, his eyes scanning the room. Olivia froze, a tray of drinks balanced in her hands. Mrs. Wilcox moved subtly toward the shotgun she kept beneath the bar. "Not here," Olivia said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "And we don't want trouble, Mr. Mercer." Mercer's gaze settled on her, recognition flaring in his eyes. "You're his woman," he said, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "The one from the dance." "I'm nobody's woman," Olivia replied coolly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd take your business elsewhere." One of Mercer's companions, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, laughed. "Feisty little thing, ain't she, Curtis?" Mercer ignored him, taking a step toward Olivia. "Tell Blackwood I'm looking for him. Tell him I know about the marshal in town. Tell him we found Wellen hiding out at the Mac entire place, and he wasn't too happy to hear Blackwood's after him." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. Xavier had gone to the Mac entire ranch that morning, ostensibly to explain his delayed visit. If Wellen was there, and if Mercer had warned him. "I'll pass along the message," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice level. "Now, please leave." Mercer took another step closer, close enough that Olivia could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Maybe I'll stay," he drawled. "Have a drink. Wait for him to come to you. He will, you know." Man like Blackwood, he's predictable when it comes to protecting what he cares about. Before Olivia could respond, the distinctive sound of a shotgun being cocked cut through the tension. "That's far enough, mister," Mrs. Wilcox called from behind the bar, the shotgun trained steadily on Mercer. "My establishment, my rules, and I don't serve troublemakers." Mercer's eyes narrowed, but he made no move toward his gun. The other patrons had gone very still, some edging toward the door, others watching with the wary interest of men accustomed to saloon violence. "The lady asked you to leave," a new voice said from the doorway. Olivia's heart leapt as Xavier stepped into the saloon, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. Behind him stood Sheriff Donovan and Marshal Porter. Mercer spun to face them, his hand dropping to his gun. "Blackwood," he spat. "About time you showed your face." "Step away from the lady, Mercer," Xavier said quietly. "This is between you and me." "This is between you and my brother," Mercer snarled. "You shot him down like a dog." Xavier nodded, his expression solemn. "I did. After he shot 3 people during a bank robbery. After he killed a young deputy who had a wife and baby at home." Mercer's face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "No, he's not," Marshal Porter interjected, stepping forward. "I have the reports right here, Mercer. Your brother was wanted in 4 territories. He killed 7 people that we know of." "Shut up," Mercer shouted, his hand tightening on his gun butt. "You don't know nothing about Ray." "I know he died trying to escape justice," Xavier said. "Just like you will if you draw that gun." The saloon had emptied swiftly, only Mrs. Wilcox, Olivia, and a few curious patrons remaining to witness the confrontation. Olivia set down her tray of drinks, her eyes fixed on Xavier. Despite his calm demeanor, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his stance. "You think I'm afraid of you," Mercer sneered. "Or these 2 tin stars." "You should be," Sheriff Donovan said matter-of-factly. 3 against 3, but we've got the law on our side, and a very determined lady with a shotgun." Mrs. Wilcox smiled grimly, the shotgun unwavering. Mercer's companions exchanged uneasy glances. The odds had shifted and not in their favor. "Curtis," the pockmarked man muttered. "Maybe we should." "Shut up, Lyle," Mercer snapped. His eyes darted around the room, calculating. "This ain't over, Blackwood, not by a long shot." "It can be," Xavier said, his voice softening slightly. "Your brother made his choices, Mercer. Made them long before I came along. Don't throw your life away chasing a vendetta that won't bring him back." Something flickered in Mercer's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or a moment of clarity. Then his expression hardened again. "You always did talk pretty, Blackwood. That's why they made you a ranger, but words won't save you next time we meet." With that, Mercer backed toward the door, his companions following suit. At the threshold, he paused, his eyes finding Olivia. "You picked the wrong man, Missy. He's living on borrowed time." Then they were gone, the sound of their horses' hooves fading into the night. The tension in the room broke like a fever. "Mrs. Wilcox lowered the shotgun. Sheriff Donovan muttered something about damned fools, and the remaining patrons erupted into excited chatter. Xavier crossed the room in long strides, his eyes searching Olivia's face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Olivia nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm fine." But Xavier, he said something about the McIntyre ranch, about Welland being there. Xavier's jaw tightened. "I know. I went out there this morning. Welland was gone, but there were signs he'd been there recently." McIntyre's foreman said a man matching his description had been hired as a hand 2 weeks ago, using the name Smith. Left in a hurry this morning. "After Mercer warned him you were coming," Olivia guessed. Xavier nodded grimly. "Which means Mercer and Welland are working together. Again." Marshal Porter joined them, his expression troubled. "This complicates things. Welland's dangerous enough on his own, with Mercer backing him." "We'll need to warn the townspeople," Sheriff Donovan said. "Post extra watches." Xavier's eyes remained on Olivia. "You should stay somewhere else tonight, somewhere safer." "I'll be fine," Olivia insisted, though fear coiled in her stomach. "Mrs. Wilcox has her shotgun and my room locks." "I'd feel better if you weren't here," Xavier pressed. "Mercer knows where to find you now. And he's the type to strike at what a man cares about, rather than face him directly." The implication of his words that she was what Xavier cared about warmed Olivia despite her fear. Still, she shook her head. "I won't be driven from my home. Not again. I'm done running, remember." Xavier's expression softened. "I remember, but there's a difference between running and tactical retreat." "She can stay with me," Mrs. Wilcox offered, joining their conversation. "My room's at the back of the building, away from the street, and I'm a light sleeper." Olivia looked at the older woman with gratitude. "Thank you." Xavier didn't appear entirely satisfied, but nodded his acceptance. "I'll stay too. Keep watch downstairs." "We all will," Marshal Porter said. "Donovan, you take first shift. I'll relieve you at midnight. Blackwood can take over at 4. As the men discussed the details of their watch rotation, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, at the threat Mercer and Welland posed, but also a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in a long time. These people, Xavier, Mrs. Wilcox, even the marshal and sheriff were standing with her, protecting her. After a year of being entirely on her own, the feeling was both foreign and deeply comforting. Later, as she gathered a few necessities from her room to take to Mrs. Wilcox's, Xavier stood in the doorway, watching her with troubled eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for bringing this danger to your door." Olivia paused, enfolding a nightgown. "You didn't bring it, Xavier. My past was always going to catch up with me eventually. At least now I don't have to face it alone." Xavier crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "You're not alone," he said fiercely. "Not anymore." Olivia looked up at him, at the determination in his blue eyes, and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly took her breath away. Without conscious thought, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Xavier froze for an instant, then his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss deepened, a year of loneliness and fear melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you," he admitted, his voice husky. Olivia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in longer than she could remember. "Even when I was sweeping the floor and being rude to you, especially then," Xavier chuckled. "You were magnificent in your irritation." Olivia laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. How long had it been since she had truly laughed? Since before San Francisco, certainly. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Wilcox calling up the stairs. "Olivia, are you ready, girl? We're locking up down here." "Coming," Olivia called back. She reluctantly stepped out of Xavier's embrace, gathering her things. At the door she paused, looking back at him. "Be careful tonight." Mercer seemed desperate, Xavier finished for her. "I know, but desperate men make mistakes, and I've got Porter and Donovan backing me." Olivia nodded, trying to take comfort in that. "Good night, Xavier." His smile was gentle. "Good night, Olivia. Sweet dreams." As she descended the stairs to join Mrs. Wilcox, Olivia thought that for the first time in a very long time, her dreams might indeed be sweet. The night passed without incident. Though Olivia slept fitfully on the small cot Mrs. Wilcox had set up in her room. Each creak of the building, each gust of wind against the windows, had her starting awake, her heart racing. Only the knowledge that Xavier was downstairs, keeping watch, allowed her to eventually drift back to sleep. Dawn brought a gray, overcast sky and the promise of more snow. Olivia rose early, dressing quietly so as not to wake Mrs. Wilcox, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep after her own restless night. Downstairs, she found Xavier seated at a table near the window, a cup of coffee in front of him and his peacemaker on the table within easy reach. He looked up as she descended the stairs, a smile warming his tired eyes. "Morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Not really," Olivia admitted, moving to the stove to pour herself a cup of coffee. "You wasn't meant to," Xavier replied with a shrug. "That's what keeping watch means." Olivia brought her coffee to the table, sitting across from him. "Any sign of Mercer or his friends?" "Nothing," Xavier said. "Porter and I checked the boarding house and the livery. They've cleared out. For now, you think they'll be back." It wasn't a question, but Xavier answered anyway. "Mercer, maybe. He's the type to nurse a grudge. But Welland's smarter. He'll be long gone by now, headed for new territory." Olivia sipped her coffee, studying Xavier over the rim of her cup. Despite his night without sleep, he looked alert, his eyes clear and focused. There was a stillness about him, a contained energy that reminded her he had been a lawman for years, accustomed to danger and vigilance. "What happens now?" she asked. Xavier set down his cup. "Porter wants to head out today, track Welland while the trail's fresh. Asked me to ride with him." Olivia's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "How long will you be gone?" "That depends," Xavier said, his eyes intent on her face. "On whether I have a reason to come back." The implication was clear and Olivia's pulse quickened. "What about Mercer?" she asked, avoiding the real question hanging between them. "Donovan can handle Mercer if he shows his face again," Xavier said. "And you've got Mrs. Wilcox and that shotgun." His expression grew serious. "But that's not what I'm asking, Olivia." Olivia set down her cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. "What are you asking?" Xavier reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if there's a future for us. If what I feel for you, what I hope you feel for me, is enough to build something on." "We've known each other less than a week," Olivia pointed out, though her heart was racing. "That's hardly enough time to know that I've never met anyone like you," Xavier interrupted gently. "To know that the thought of riding away from you feels like leaving a part of myself behind." "I disagree." Olivia stared at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler fingers. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. Not of Mercer or the Hargroves or any external threat. I'm afraid of hoping again. Of believing I can have a normal life with love in it. Olivia, Xavier said, his voice so tender it made her throat ache. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, seeing in them a depth of emotion that both terrified and exhilarated her. I can't promise you normal, he said. My life doesn't lend itself to that, but I can promise you honesty, respect, loyalty, and yes, love, because that's what I feel for you, unlikely as it seems after so short a time. Olivia's breath caught. Xavier, you don't have to say it back, he assured her quickly. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance, for us to find out what this could be together. Olivia looked at this man, this former Texas Ranger who had tracked down evidence to clear her name, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation, who looked at her with such warmth in his blue eyes. A man who knew the darkest parts of her story and hadn't turned away. Yes, she said simply. Xavier's expression brightened. Yes. Olivia nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, I want to find out what this could be. Yes, I want you to come back to Silver Creek, to me. Xavier's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. I'll ride out with Porter today, he said. Help him track Wellen, but I swear to you, Olivia Coleman, I will come back. I'll be here, Olivia promised. No more running. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of boots on the boardwalk outside. Marshal Porter entered, stamping snow from his boots. Morning, he called, nodding to them both. Ready to ride, Blackwood, trails getting colder by the hour. Xavier nodded, reluctantly releasing Olivia's hands. Ready. Just need to gather my gear from the boarding house. Porter glanced between them, a knowing look in his weathered eyes. I'll meet you at the livery in 30 minutes. With a tip of his hat to Olivia, he departed, leaving them alone again. Xavier rose from his chair, buckling on his gun belt. I should go pack. Olivia stood as well, suddenly reluctant to let him out of her sight. How long do you think you'll be gone? A week. Maybe 2, Xavier said. Depends on how far Wellen's run and whether we can pick up his trail. 2 weeks. Olivia repeated, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Xavier stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. It'll pass quickly, he promised. And when I return, we can talk about the future, our future. Olivia nodded, allowing herself to lean into his strength. Be careful, she said, her hands resting against his chest. Wellen sounds dangerous. So am I, Xavier reminded her with a slight smile. When necessary. He bent to kiss her, a lingering touch that held both promise and farewell. When they parted, Olivia was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. I'll walk you to the boarding house, she offered, not ready to say goodbye. Xavier nodded, taking her hand in his. They stepped out into the cold morning air, snow beginning to fall in lazy flakes that melted on their shoulders and hair. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet, most of the town still abed at this early hour. As they walked hand in hand through the falling snow, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle over her. There were still dangers to face, uncertainties to navigate, but for the first time in a long, long while, she wasn't facing them alone. And that, she thought as she looked up at Xavier's profile against the gray sky, made all the difference in the world. 2 weeks stretched into 3, with no word from Xavier or Marshal Porter. Snow continued to fall intermittently, making travel difficult and communication even more so. Olivia tried not to worry, reminding herself that Xavier was experienced, capable, that he had promised to return. Still, as each day passed without news, anxiety gnawed at her. Mrs. Will Cox, perceptive as always, kept Olivia busy with extra tasks around the saloon. But even inventory and deep cleaning couldn't entirely distract her from watching the door each time it opened. Mercer and his companions had not returned to Silver Creek. Sheriff Donovan had heard rumors they were working at a ranch near the territorial border, apparently having abandoned their vendetta against Xavier for the time being. As for the Hargroves, a newspaper from San Francisco confirmed what Marshal Porter had told her. The family had indeed retreated to Europe amid scandal, their reputation in tatters as more of James Hargrove's victims came forward with their stories. Olivia had read the article with a mixture of vindication and lingering sorrow for the women whose lives, like hers, had been forever altered by their encounters with a monster wearing the mask of a gentleman. On the 23rd day after Xavier's departure, a fierce blizzard descended on Silver Creek. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows and driving snow into drifts that reached the saloon's windows. No one ventured out except for absolute necessities, and the Dusty Rose remained empty save for Olivia and Mrs. Wilcox. "No point keeping open tonight," Mrs. Wilcox declared as afternoon faded into early evening, the storm showing no signs of abating. "Not even minors are fool enough to be out in this." Olivia nodded, helping the older woman bank the stove. "I'll finish sweeping, then head up." Mrs. Wilcox studied Olivia's face with knowing eyes. "He'll be back, girl. Men like Blackwood don't make promises lightly." "I know," Olivia said, forcing a smile. "I'm not worried." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Mrs. Wilcox merely patted her arm before heading upstairs, her arthritis paining her more than usual in the cold weather. Alone in the dimly lit saloon, Olivia moved methodically through her closing routine. Sweep the floors, wipe down the tables, stack the chairs, check the bar stock, each task familiar, requiring just enough attention to keep her mind from wandering too far down paths of worry. She was just extinguishing the last oil lamp when a heavy pounding on the door made her jump. "We're closed," she called, her hand automatically reaching for the shotgun Mrs. Wilcox kept behind the bar. "Olivia." The voice was muffled by the wind and the thick door, but unmistakable. "Olivia, it's me." Her heart leapt. "Xavier." She rushed to the door, struggling with the heavy bolt. When she finally pulled it open, snow swirled in, along with a figure so encrusted with ice and snow he was barely recognizable. "Xavier." Olivia gasped, helping him inside and quickly closing the door against the storm. "My God, what happened? Are you hurt?" Xavier stumbled to the nearest chair, collapsing into it. His face was wind-burned and haggard, his lips blue with cold. Ice crusted his beard and eyebrows, and his clothes were stiff with frozen snow. "Need to get warm," he managed through chattering teeth. "Horse died, 5 miles back. Walked the rest." Olivia moved swiftly, her earlier lethargy forgotten. She stoked the stove back to life, adding more wood until flames roared behind the iron grate. Then she hurried to Xavier, helping him remove his frozen coat and gloves. "Your hands," she gasped, seeing the white patches of frostbite on his fingers. "Been worse," Xavier said, his voice stronger now as warmth began to penetrate his frozen body. "Got caught in the storm coming over the pass. Didn't think I'd make it." Olivia fetched a basin of water, gently bathing his hands to warm them slowly. "Where's Marshal Porter?" she asked. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "Dead. Wellen ambushed us near the territorial border, shot Porter before either of us knew he was there." Olivia's hand stilled. "And Wellen, also dead," Xavier said grimly. "I tracked him for 2 days after, caught up to him at a line shack. He chose to fight rather than surrender." The matter-of-fact way he described what must have been a life-or-death struggle made Olivia's heart ache. She resumed her gentle ministrations. noting with relief that color was returning to Xavier's fingers, though they would be painful as feeling returned. "You should have waited out the storm somewhere safe," she chided softly. "Not risked your life traveling in a blizzard." Xavier's blue eyes, bright in his wind-burned face, met hers. "I promised I'd come back to you," he said simply. "Already been gone too long." Something in Olivia's chest tightened at his words. This man had fought through a blizzard, walked 5 miles through deep snow after his horse died, all to keep a promise to her. She had never known such devotion, such determination. "Let me get you some food," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And dry clothes, Mrs. Wilcox has some of her late husband's things upstairs." Xavier caught her hand as she turned to go. "Olivia," he said, his voice low and intense. "Every day away from you was a day too long. Every mile back to Silver Creek I thought of you, your smile, your courage. The way you looked at me when I left, like you were memorizing my face." Olivia's breath caught. "I was," she admitted softly, in case you didn't come back." "I will always come back to you," Xavier vowed, his eyes never leaving hers. "As long as there's breath in my body, I will find my way back to you." The simple truth in his words, the absolute certainty in his voice, broke something open inside Olivia. The careful walls she had built around her heart, the fear that had kept her isolated for so long, crumbled like sand castles before the tide. "I love you," she whispered, the words rising from a place so deep within her she hadn't known it existed. "I think I've loved you since that first morning when you came in asking for coffee and looked at me like you could see my soul." Xavier stood, ignoring the pain in his thawing hands, and pulled her into his arms. "Olivia Coleman," he murmured against her hair. "You are the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. And I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the longing of their separation, all the fear of what might have been lost, all the joy of reunion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not today or tomorrow when you're ready, but say you'll be my wife." Olivia's heart soared. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Xavier Blackwood." Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the walls of the Dusty Rose Saloon, Olivia and Xavier had found a shelter stronger than any storm, the sanctuary of love built on truth, acceptance, and the courage to believe in a future together. In the spring of 1877, Olivia Coleman became Olivia Blackwood in a small ceremony in Silver Creek's newly completed church. Mrs. Wilcox stood as Olivia's witness, beaming with motherly pride despite her gruff attempts to hide it. Sheriff Donovan served as Xavier's best man, the two having formed a friendship during the months Xavier had remained in Silver Creek. The town had turned out in force for the wedding, curious about the quiet saloon girl and the former Texas Ranger who had chosen to make their community home. Olivia wore a simple gown of ivory silk, ordered from Denver at Mrs. Wilcox's insistence. Xavier, resplendent in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle toward him. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of spring wildflowers, Olivia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of San Francisco to the tentative beginnings of a new life in Silver Creek. From a woman running from her past to one embracing her future. From solitude to partnership with a man who knew her darkest secrets and loved her not in spite of them, but because they were part of the woman she had become. After the ceremony, the entire town celebrated at the Dusty Rose, which Mrs. Wilcox had closed to regular business for the day. There was dancing and laughter, food and drink flowing freely. Olivia, who had spent so long avoiding connections, found herself surrounded by well-wishers, by people who had come to care for her and Xavier during their months in Silver Creek. As evening fell, Xavier led his bride away from the festivities to the small house they had purchased at the edge of town. It was nothing grand, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, with a small stable out back, but to Olivia, it was a palace. Their home, a place where they could build a life together. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Xavier asked as they stood on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Olivia leaned against her husband's shoulder, a contentment she had never thought to experience filling her heart. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Xavier's arm tightened around her waist. "Not a dream," he assured her. "Though I sometimes feel the same way, that I'll wake up back on the trail alone without you." Olivia turned in his embrace, looking up at the face that had become as dear to her as her own. "We found each other against all odds," she said softly. "A former Texas Ranger and a woman on the run. What are the chances?" "Fate," Xavier said, repeating the word she had used months ago. "Or Providence. Either way, I'm grateful." "So am I," Olivia whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "So very grateful." As the stars multiplied in the vast Montana sky, Olivia and Xavier Blackwood stepped across the threshold of their home, leaving the past behind and embracing the future they would build together, a future founded on the truth that love, real love, does not turn away from darkness, but draws closer, illuminating the path forward with its unwavering light. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening in 1882, Olivia Blackwood sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching her husband teach their 3-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. The boy, a miniature version of Xavier with the same dark hair and startling blue eyes, squealed with delight as the gentle mare plodded around the yard, Xavier's hand steady on his back. "Not too fast," Olivia called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant with their second child, she found herself more cautious than usual, though she tried not to let her worries limit James's adventures. "We're being careful, aren't we, partner?" Xavier called back, winking at his son. "Careful, Mama." James echoed, his face alight with the joy of newfound independence. Olivia smiled, her heart full as she watched them. The years had been kind. Xavier had taken a position as deputy sheriff when Donovan retired, providing them with a steady income and work that suited his skills without the constant danger of bounty hunting. Olivia had continued working at the Dusty Rose until James was born, then had shifted to teaching piano to the children of Silver Creek, a vocation that allowed her to use the talents her father had nurtured so long ago. Mrs. Wilcox had passed peacefully in her sleep the previous winter, leaving the Dusty Rose to Olivia in her will. They had sold it to a young couple from back east, using the money to expand their home and set aside funds for their children's education. Silver Creek had grown into a proper town, with a bank, a school, and even a small opera house where Olivia occasionally performed at community events. As for the shadows of their past, they had gradually receded. The Hargroves had never returned from Europe. Curtis Mercer had eventually run afoul of the law in Wyoming Territory and was serving time in the territorial prison. The nightmares that had once plagued Olivia's sleep came less frequently now, and when they did, Xavier was always there to hold her until they passed. Life wasn't perfect. They had their disagreements, their struggles. Money was sometimes tight, and Xavier's work occasionally brought danger to their door, but they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthened by the knowledge of what they had overcome to find each other. Xavier concluded the riding lesson, lifting James from the pony's back and setting him on his shoulders. The boy giggled, his small hands grasping his father's hair for balance. "I think that's enough excitement for one day," Xavier said, approaching the porch. "This young cowboy needs his supper." "And a bath," Olivia added, noting the dirt smudged across her son's cheeks. "You both do." Xavier grinned, the smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "Yes, madam. Whatever you say, madam." He set James down on the porch steps. "Go on inside and wash up, partner." "I'll be right in." As James scampered into the house, Xavier sat beside Olivia on the porch swing, his hand automatically moving to rest on her rounded belly. "How are you feeling?" "Good," Olivia said, covering his hand with her own. "The baby's been kicking all afternoon." "Strong like her brother, her," Xavier raised an eyebrow. "You sound certain." Olivia smiled mysteriously. "Just a feeling." Xavier leaned over to kiss her softly. "Boy or girl, as long as the baby's healthy and you're well, that's all that matters to me." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sun begin its descent toward the distant mountains. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't walked into the Dusty Rose that morning? If I hadn't told you my story that night?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on her belly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at you, at James, at the life we've built, and I can't imagine any other path. This is where we were meant to be, Olivia, together." Olivia's throat tightened with emotion. "When I told you what happened in San Francisco, I was so certain you'd leave, that no man could want a woman with such a past. And I'd never been so certain of anything as I was that I wanted to stay," Xavier said, his voice warm with memory. "Not just because I admired your courage, though I did, but because in that moment when you trusted me with your truth, I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with, strong, resilient, real." "I'm glad you stayed," Olivia whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "So glad." Xavier kissed her temple, his lips lingering against her skin. "Always, Olivia, always." Inside, they could hear James calling for them, his young voice impatient for their attention. Olivia laughed, wiping away a stray tear. "Duty calls," she said, allowing Xavier to help her to her feet. Hand in hand, they walked into their home, into the life they had created together. A life built not despite their pasts, but because of them. A life that proved, day by day, that love, true love, doesn't turn away from darkness, but draws closer, illuminating the way forward with its steady, unwavering light.